Welcome back to Walk's Wednesday Words, where we're taking a tour of the history of Christian spirituality. We're now at the beginning of the 20th century here in Florida. 1899 to be exact, when the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman was born. He grew up in Daytona Beach in public schools through the 8th grade. Then a private Baptist academy in Jacksonville for high school, then college in Atlanta, and finally theological school in upstate New York. He was ordained an American Baptist pastor. That's one of the Northern Baptist traditions. Howard Thurman served a church in Oberlin, Ohio. He met some Quakers, and this is important. He met and studied with the famous Quaker teacher Rufus Jones. There he began exploring silence and mysticism. We would certainly recognize those as important aspects of spirituality. Soon, Thurman and his young family headed back to Atlanta, where he taught and served as dean of the chapel for college. He was a great preacher. He was in Atlanta from 1930 to 1944. Then, surprising everyone, he went to start a new church in San Francisco, California. In 1956, he was called to Boston University to preach in the chapel and teach religion. I mentioned a family. He married and was widowed and married again. Each wife had a daughter. He and his second wife traveled a lot, especially to India, where he met and studied with Mahatma Gandhi in 1936, when Gandhi was just a lawyer and a leader of the Indian independence movement. Gandhi was practicing and perfecting nonviolence. What's fascinating is Thurman, this Baptist from Florida, was sort of a mystic. He was very much into spirituality and spiritual experiences. He had several while in India, and those mystical ideas were shaped by his Christian theology and graduate level study of the Old and New Testaments. While Howard Thurman was in India, he looked across the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan and had a vision. He had a vision of all humanity coming together as one, and the importance of equality and equal rights for all Americans. The oneness of humanity and the unity of the church and ecumenicism was important to Thurman, maybe the primary thing he taught, the primary spirituality. Another theme that I really resonate with is his call for community. Remember, he was an academic who started a new church called the Fellowship Church of All Peoples in San Francisco in 1944. It was a multiracial church, which was unusual for even California in the 1940s and 50s. When Howard Thurman was called back into academia at Boston University, Life magazine named him one of the 12 best preachers in the United States. That's back when there was a Life magazine, and it covered religion as well as many subjects. So we see a confluence of some of my last few talks. A Baptist congregational revivalist stream like the Cane Ridge Revival, and high educational standards like John Calvin. A Quaker influence. A fine preacher who moved in and out of universities and a congregation. A popular speaker on college campuses. He preferred to talk about spirituality and theology, although Howard Thurman was often called upon to talk about race relations. What I've not told you about Thurman, and I've been deliberately deceitful, he was black. He grew up in segregated Florida. His grandmother had been a slave in Madison County in the Panhandle. He went to Jacksonville Baptist Academy because it was one of only 3 high schools for African Americans in our state in the early 20th century. He went to Morehouse College in Atlanta and returned to teach at Morehouse and Spelman College in 1929. When he was there, he was friends with Martin Luther King Sr. He was a mentor to the young Martin King Jr. Howard Thurman was the theologian all the civil rights workers and leaders read and interacted with. Kelly Miller Smith, James Lawson, and later John Lewis, who just died. Thurman's theology came first. His book, Jesus and the Disinherited, undergirded James Cone's Black Liberation Theology, which was published in 1970. Thurman wrote 20 books, many academic articles, countless sermons. Many of his books are about spirituality. And I suppose this is the place to stop today's Wednesday Words about the history of Christian spirituality. True spirituality leads to action. It's influenced by the academy and other religions and takes place in congregations. Howard Thurman's a great example of Christian spirituality, and I'm so glad I've begun to read his work. I really resonate with his yearning for community. And I'll talk more about that and oneness later. Dr. Howard Thurman, an important person in the history of Christian spirituality. See you next week.